He was called a man after God's own heart. He was also an adulterer and a murderer. He killed a giant with a single stone, but was brought to his knees by a single glance from a rooftop. Anointed king, then hunted like a criminal. He built a kingdom, but his family fell to betrayal, rebellion, and murder. This isn't a story of a perfect hero. It's the story of how our greatest strengths live beside our most devastating weaknesses, and what it truly means to be redeemed from the ruins of your own making. Have you ever felt small in the face of a giant challenge? Have you ever had the sensation that the whole world was against you, even when you knew you were doing the right thing? If so, then you have more in common with one of the greatest kings in history than you might imagine. Get ready to dive into the incredible journey of David, a simple shepherd who became the most beloved king of Israel and a man after God's own heart. Our story begins not in a palace, but in a dusty, unassuming village called Bethlehem, a small town nestled in the Judean hills. Here lived Jesse, an ordinary man tending his flocks. His family, like many, blended into the landscape, yet their lineage was about to be woven into the very fabric of Israel's destiny. For it was here, in this quiet corner, that the prophet Samuel was sent on a secret and crucial mission: to anoint a new king for Israel. 1 Samuel 16:1. And who was the chosen one? Was it the eldest, tall and strong? No, it was David, the youngest of Jesse's 8 sons. While his brothers paraded their strength, David spent his days in the sun-drenched fields, safeguarding his father's sheep. This seemingly mundane task was no less than a training ground. He developed courage, fending off ferocious lions and bears that dared to threaten his flock. He practiced compassion, caring for the weakest lambs. His days and nights under the vast, silent sky weren't wasted. They honed him into a leader, though he knew it not. Bethlehem, a place so small it could be easily overlooked, would later be etched into history, not just for David, but for another profound arrival centuries later. The dusty shepherd's path was God's preparation. But how could a humble shepherd boy, overlooked by his own family, ever be chosen to lead a nation? The wind howled through the valley of Elah, carrying not just dust, but the terrifying bellows of a giant. For 40 long days, the Philistine army stood arrayed for battle, facing the frightened Israelites. But it wasn't just the sheer numbers that instilled dread. It was their champion. His name was Goliath of Gath, a name that echoed fear across the hills. Imagine him, a towering figure nearly 3 meters tall, a bronze helmet gleaming on his head, scale armor weighing perhaps 50 kilograms covering his body. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, its iron point alone weighing more than 6 kilograms. Every morning, every evening, for 40 agonizing days, Goliath lumbered between the two armies, his voice booming across the valley, mocking, challenging, utterly paralyzing the hearts of Israel. "Why do you come out and line up for battle?" he taunted. "Choose a man and have him come down to me. If he can fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us." 1 Samuel 17, 8-9. This was single combat, a grim tradition where the fate of nations, entire peoples, rested on the shoulders of 2 champions. Think of the psychological warfare at play here. 40 days of relentless psychological torture. How did a nation cope with such a daily torment? No one dared to answer. How could they? The mightiest warriors of Israel, including King Saul himself, a king who towered over his people, were filled with terror. Their courage had dissolved into a cold, creeping fear, leaving them trembling in their camps. They saw only an unstoppable force, a monstrous embodiment of death itself. What hope could there be against such an impossible foe, when even the king himself was cowed? Into this scene of fear and paralysis enters a young shepherd, equipped with nothing but faith. But who was this young man? The air was thick with expectation in Jesse's home. One by one, Samuel observed Jesse's sons. Eliab, strong and imposing, stepped forward. Surely this was the Lord's chosen. But a quiet whisper echoed in Samuel's heart. Do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. 1 Samuel 16:7. One by one, 6 more sons paraded before the prophet, impressive in their own right, each dismissed by the divine voice. The tension mounted. Had God truly left them without a king? Intrigued, Samuel asked Jesse, "Are these all the sons you have?" Jesse, perhaps a little embarrassed, replied, "There is still the youngest. He is tending the sheep." A shepherd boy. You can almost feel the air shift, the unspoken surprise. Why would the prophet even consider him? But Samuel insisted, "Send for him. We will not sit down until he arrives." 1 Samuel 16:11. Imagine the scene. David, called from the sun-drenched fields, perhaps still smelling of sheep and dust, stands before the elders. A young man, ruddy, with beautiful eyes and a good appearance. But what truly distinguished him was not what man saw, but what God saw. And in that moment, the Lord spoke to Samuel, "Rise and anoint him. This is the one." 1 Samuel 16:12. With the horn of oil in his hand, Samuel poured the sacred oil over David's head. Right there, in the presence of his bewildered brothers. It was more than a ritual. It was a divine impartation. And from that day on, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David. 1 Samuel 16:13. It is a profound lesson for us all. God doesn't seek qualifications through human eyes. He looks at the heart, at character forged in quiet faithfulness, preparing individuals in unexpected ways for purposes grander than they can imagine. With the Spirit upon him, David returned to his sheep. But destiny had another call in store for him. What was happening in the king's palace? Imagine the opulent halls of King Saul's palace, now shadowed by a deep unrest. A dark, tormenting spirit, sent from the Lord, plagued the king, casting a pall over the entire court. 1 Samuel 16:14. His mind was a battlefield, his heart a storm. The servants, desperate for solace, suggested that soothing music might calm the troubled monarch. They sought not just a musician, but someone whose very presence could dispel the gloom. News traveled fast, even in ancient Israel.
A young shepherd from Bethlehem had a growing reputation. "He is a skillful player of the harp," one servant surely whispered, "and a mighty warrior, and wise in speech, and a handsome man, and the Lord is with him." 1 Samuel 16:18. A warrior, wise in speech, handsome, and God was with him? Such talk would undoubtedly reach the ears of a king craving peace. And so, a royal summons. From the quiet fields, David found himself thrust into the vibrant, often dangerous, world of the royal court. Can you picture him? A young man, perhaps still smelling of sheep, entering the grandeur of the palace, harp clutched in hand. He played, and as his fingers danced across the strings, a melody of peace filled the chambers, quieting the storm within Saul. The king found himself drawn to David, making him his armor-bearer. This wasn't luck, this was divine orchestration. The long hours David spent in solitude, strumming his lyre for sheep, weren't merely hobbies. They were God's training. This exposure to court life, to military strategy, to the intricacies of kingship, it all silently groomed him for a future he couldn't yet grasp. David's sensitivity, his courage, his natural leadership blossomed in this unexpected forge. David's time in Saul's court was a training ground, but his true test and his path to national heroism was about to begin. It was a task, simple enough. Deliver supplies to his older brothers, who were cowering in the face of the Philistine challenge. But David, fresh from the quiet fields of Bethlehem, arrived at Valley of Elah to find not battle, but paralysis. 40 days of Goliath's taunts had stripped the Israelite army, including his valiant brothers, of all courage.
Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? 1 Samuel 17:26. David's voice, sharp with indignation, cut through the murmured fear. His question, born of unwavering faith, stood in stark contrast to the despair around him. This wasn't bravado. It was a righteous anger that stemmed from a deep conviction in God's power. Had he forgotten the countless nights under the stars, protecting his flock from predatory lions and bears? He calmly recounted these victories to King Saul, not as boasts, but as testimonies. "The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine." 1 Samuel 17:37. When Saul, desperate, offered his own royal armor, heavy, cumbersome, designed for a man of war, not a shepherd, David politely refused. He stripped it off, opting for what he knew best: his sling, simple and familiar, and 5 smooth stones chosen from the stream bed. What power could such humble tools possess against a giant clad in bronze? Here lies a profound theological truth. God delights in working through the weak and the unexpected, not to diminish human effort, but to magnify his own strength. It's a reminder that true power often isn't found in worldly might, but in unshakable faith. "You come to me with a sword, a spear, and a javelin," David declared. "But I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts." What happened next would change Israel forever. The two stood, facing each other, a tableau etched into history. A towering, heavily armed giant, and a slight, young shepherd armed only with trust.
Goliath, incensed by David's youthful appearance, jeered, "Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?" But David's reply cut through the Philistine's arrogance with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." 1 Samuel 17:45-47. His words were not just defiant, they were prophetic, declaring that the battle belonged to the Lord. The air crackled. David reached into his bag, pulled out a single stone, placed it in his sling, and spun it with all his might. The stone whistled through the air, finding its mark with terrifying accuracy: Goliath's forehead. A small, seemingly insignificant rock, propelled by faith, struck the seemingly insurmountable foe. The giant, who had mocked an entire nation for 40 days, staggered, then crashed face first to the ground, a thunderous impact that silenced the valley. The improbable had happened. The shepherd had defeated the warrior. Goliath, the symbol of Philistine might, lay vanquished. David, running forward, drew the giant's own colossal sword, a poetic turn, and severed his head. Silence gave way to a deafening roar. Could anyone believe what they had just witnessed? The Philistines, seeing their champion dead, turned and fled in panic, routed by an unarmed shepherd and a God whom they did not know. The Israelites, invigorated, chased them, securing an astonishing victory. Overnight, David transformed from an obscure shepherd into a national hero, his name on every lip. Women sang in the streets, their voices echoing the joy of deliverance. Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. David's victory brought him fame, but with it came the jealous gaze of the very king he had served. How would this shift the course of his life? In the aftermath of Goliath's defeat, a most unlikely bond formed.
Jonathan, the crown prince, Saul's own son, should have seen David as a rival. Instead, his soul was knit to the soul of David, and he loved him as his own soul. 1 Samuel 18:1. This was no casual acquaintance. It was a covenant of deep affection and mutual respect, a friendship that transcended politics and personal ambition. Jonathan's actions solidified this profound connection. In a gesture of immense significance, he stripped off his own princely robe, a symbol of his status and heirship, and gave it to David, along with his sword, bow, and belt. 1 Samuel 18:4. This wasn't merely a gift between friends. In ancient Near Eastern culture, it was a symbolic act, recognizing David's future claim to the throne and a public declaration of loyalty. What extraordinary humility for an heir apparent. David, meanwhile, continued to excel. Whatever mission Saul sent him on, David was so successful that Saul gave him a high rank in the army. This pleased all the troops and Saul's officers as well. 1 Samuel 18:5. David demonstrated not only bravery in battle but also wisdom and skill in leadership, earning the admiration of the people. But success, when viewed through the lenses of insecurity and envy, can breed bitterness. As the victorious army returned, women poured out of the towns dancing and singing, their voices celebrating the heroes. "Saul has slain his thousands," they chanted, their voices rising, "and David his tens of thousands." 1 Samuel 18:7. This joyous song, intended to honor, ignited a chilling fuse in Saul's heart. Saul's heart, once open to David's music, was now filled with a dark envy that would drive him to desperate acts. What darkness lurked within the king? The joyous songs of David's tens of thousands were music to the ears of Israel, but to King Saul they were a death knell. A chilling silence fell over the palace, broken only by Saul's agitated pacing. His jealousy, a festering wound, quickly escalated into outright hostility.
The very next day, as David played his harp to soothe the king, an evil spirit from God came forcefully upon Saul. His eyes dark with rage, he hurled a spear, not once, but twice, attempting to pin David to the wall. 1 Samuel 18, 10-11. David, agile and alert, evaded the deadly projectiles. Barely escaping, he must have wondered, how could this once loving king turn so violently against him? But Saul's madness only intensified. Unable to kill David directly, he concocted elaborate schemes. He offered his daughter, Michal, in marriage, demanding a dowry of 100 Philistine foreskins. His hope? That David would fall in battle. 1 Samuel 18, 20-27. Yet David, protected by God, returned not with 100, but with 200, triumphantly claiming Michal as his bride. Even then, Saul's murderous intent festered. He commanded his son Jonathan and all his officials to kill David. 1 Samuel 19:1. But Jonathan, true to his oath of friendship, bravely interceded, reminding his father of the great victory David had won for Israel. "Let not the king do wrong to his servant David," Jonathan pleaded. "He has not wronged you, and what he has done has benefited you greatly." 1 Samuel 19:4-5. Temporarily swayed, Saul swore he would not harm David. But the peace was fragile. Soon, the dark spirit returned, and a new spear whizzed past David's head. Realizing the danger was absolute, Michal, David's wife, became his savior. As Saul's messengers surrounded their house, she lowered David out a window, urging him to flee for his life. 1 Samuel 19:11-12. Now a fugitive, David was forced to abandon his home and family, beginning a long and perilous period of exile. Where would he find refuge? Hunted like an animal, David's life took a dramatic turn, forcing him into a desperate flight for survival. His first stop was Nob, the city of priests.
Here, ravenous and without weapons, he cunningly deceived Ahimelech, the priest, into giving him the consecrated bread and, startlingly, the very sword of Goliath. 1 Samuel 21:1-9. This act, born of necessity, would later have tragic consequences, a reminder of the ripple effects of choices made under duress. From Nob, David fled to Gath, the Philistine city of his greatest triumph. What irony! The hero of Israel, now seeking refuge among his former enemies. To escape recognition and certain death, he resorted to a desperate ploy. Feigning madness, scratching on doors and letting saliva run down his beard. 1 Samuel 21:10-15. Can you imagine the humiliation? The chosen king, reduced to such a charade. But God's protection remained. Eventually, David found refuge in the desolate cave of Adullam. Here, a motley crew began to gather around him. Everyone who was in distress or in debt or discontented. 1 Samuel 22:1-2. They were outcasts, much like David himself,
forging a bond in the crucible of adversity. From this unlikely assembly, David began to form the core of his future army and administration. This period of flight, of living by his wits in the wilderness, was crucial. It forged his character, teaching him dependence on God, resilience, and the practicalities of leadership far removed from the comforts of a palace. The Psalms, many penned during this very time, speak to the raw human experiences of fear, loneliness, and ultimately, unwavering trust in God. During these hidden years, David learned what it truly meant to lead, not just to fight battles, but to care for a diverse and vulnerable flock, much as he once cared for sheep. Despite being hunted relentlessly, David maintained a profound respect for God's anointed. How would this unique principle be tested in the wilderness? Hunted like a wild beast, David found himself in the wilderness, the desert wind a constant companion.
Yet, amidst the hardship, his true character, forged in the fields, would be revealed in two astonishing acts of restraint. Saul, pursuing David with relentless fury, unknowingly entered a cave at En-Gedi to relieve himself. Unbeknownst to him, David and his men were hiding deep within, shrouded by the darkness. 1 Samuel 24. "This is the day the Lord spoke of," David's men whispered, their eyes gleaming with a fierce loyalty, urging him to seize the moment, to end the persecution once and for all. But David refused. Sneaking closer, he did not strike the king down. Instead, he quietly cut off a corner of Saul's robe. Immediately his heart smote him. He was conscience-stricken for having even touched the garment of God's anointed, sternly rebuking his men, forbidding them to lay a hand on Saul. 1 Samuel 24, 4-7. Later, the opportunity arose again. Under the cover of night, David and his loyal companion Abishai ventured into Saul's sleeping encampment. Saul lay vulnerable, his spear planted in the ground beside his head, his water jug nearby. 1 Samuel 26. "Let me pin him to the ground with one stroke of the spear. I won't have to strike him twice," Abishai pleaded. The temptation must have been immense, a chance to escape years of relentless pursuit. But David's conviction was unyielding. Do not destroy him. Who can lay a hand on the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? 1 Samuel 26, 9-11. David simply took the spear and water jar, a silent testament to his restraint, leaving Saul unharmed. What remarkable self-control, born not of fear, but of a profound reverence for God's authority. Could you have done the same? These acts of restraint cemented David's character and showed his deep understanding of divine authority. But even with Saul's death, David's path to the throne was not straightforward. What obstacles remained? The news ripped through David's camp like a knife. King Saul, his relentlessly bitter enemy, was dead.
Not only Saul, but Jonathan, his dearest friend, had fallen in battle against the Philistines on Mount Gilboa. Saul, gravely wounded, had taken his own life to avoid capture and humiliation. 1 Samuel 31. A young Amalekite, hoping for rich reward, brought the news to David, even claiming to have dealt the fatal blow to the king at Saul's own request. But David's reaction was not one of triumph or relief. Instead, he condemned the Amalekite and ordered his immediate execution. This was an unshakable demonstration of David's deep reverence for the sacredness of God's anointed, even an anointed king who had sought his life for years. 2 Samuel chapter 1, verses 1-16. You might expect celebration, a sigh of relief,
But David's heart was broken. He tore his clothes, wept and fasted, composing an eloquent and heartbreaking lament for both Saul and Jonathan. Your glory, O Israel, lies slain on your heights. How the mighty have fallen, he mourned. He praised their loyalty, their strength, and particularly the profound, unconditional love he shared with Jonathan. 2 Samuel chapter 1, verses 19 through 27. This was the mark of a truly noble character, to mourn a persecutor as well as a loyal friend. The path was now clear, but David did not rush. He inquired of the Lord, seeking divine guidance for his next step. Shall I go up to one of the towns of Judah? The Lord answered, Go up. David further asked, Where shall I go? And the Lord said, To Hebron. 2 Samuel chapter 2, verses 1 through 4. This careful consultation with God marked a stark contrast to Saul's impulsive reign. In Hebron, David was anointed king, not over all Israel, but specifically over the tribe of Judah. With Judah united under David, the rest of Israel remained under Saul's lineage, setting the stage for a period of conflict and unification. The death of Saul and Jonathan plunged Israel into a period of uncertainty.
While David was anointed king over Judah in Hebron, the northern tribes, under the influence of Abner, Saul's cunning commander, remained loyal to Saul's house. Abner, seizing the opportunity, appointed Ishbosheth, Saul's surviving son, as king over the rest of Israel. 2 Samuel 2:8 through 10. And so began a long and bitter civil war, a painful schism that tore at the very heart of the nation. The house of Saul, though declining, clung to its former glory, while the house of David grew steadily stronger, gaining momentum with each passing year. 2 Samuel 3:1. What internal conflicts tore at the soul of Israel during this time? The struggle, however, was not without its shadows. Abner, seeing the inevitable shift of power, began negotiations with David. But Joab, David's fiercely loyal and sometimes ruthless general, harbored a personal vendetta against Abner. In a cold-blooded act of revenge for his brother's death, Joab cornered and assassinated Abner. 2 Samuel 3:26-27. David, shocked and horrified, publicly distanced himself from the heinous deed, mourning Abner's death. He cursed Joab and his family, demonstrating his commitment to justice and his disapproval of such treachery, even when it seemed to pave his way to the throne. 2 Samuel 3:28-39. Not long after, Ishbosheth, weak and vulnerable without Abner, was himself assassinated by two of his own captains, who brought his head to David, hoping for reward. 2 Samuel 4. But David, once again, acted with stern justice, executing the murderers for laying hands on God's anointed, even a flawed one. These acts solidified his reputation as a king who honored righteousness. Finally, after 7 long years, the elders of all the tribes of Israel came to David in Hebron. They acknowledged his leadership, his past victories, and God's promise. And there, with one voice, they anointed David king over all Israel. 2 Samuel 5:1-3. The nation, at last, was unified under one shepherd. Finally, the full promise was realized. With all Israel united, David made a visionary choice for his capital, a city that would become the heart of the nation. With all Israel finally united under his banner, David faced a crucial decision: where to establish his capital. He needed a city that embodied unity, a place free from tribal loyalties that could serve as the heart of his kingdom. His eyes fell upon Jerusalem, then a Jebusite stronghold. "Unless you remove the blind and the lame, you will not enter here," the Jebusites taunted, confident in their defenses. 2 Samuel 5:6. But David, with a bold and strategic stroke, conquered the fortress of Zion, making it his own. 2 Samuel 5:7. Jerusalem's location, perched on a hill, was strategically brilliant, easily defensible against attack. More importantly, it was a neutral territory, never having belonged to any of the 12 tribes, making it the perfect symbolic center for a unified nation. But Jerusalem was to be more than just a political capital. It was to become the spiritual heart of Israel. David yearned to bring the Ark of the Covenant, the sacred symbol of God's presence, to his new city. The first attempt, however, ended in tragedy. Unaware of the prescribed method for transporting the Ark, David allowed it to be carried on a new cart. When the oxen stumbled, Uzzah reached out to steady it and was struck dead by the Lord. 2 Samuel 6:6-7. This solemn event served as a stark reminder: God's holiness could not be approached carelessly. Learning from this profound lesson, David embarked on a second attempt, this time with meticulous adherence to the law. The Ark arrived in Jerusalem with great celebration, carried reverently by priests, accompanied by sacrifices and joyful music. David, clad in a linen ephod, danced with unbridled passion before the Lord, his heart overflowing with worship. 2 Samuel 6:12-15. His wife, Michal, Saul's daughter, watched from a window, scornful of his undignified display.
"How the king of Israel has distinguished himself today," she sneered, uncovering himself before the eyes of his servants' female slaves, as vulgar fellows shamelessly uncover themselves. 2 Samuel 6:20. But David, unfazed, famously retorted, "I will celebrate before the Lord. I will become even more undignified than this, and I will be humiliated in my own eyes. But by these slave girls you spoke of, I shall be held in honor." 2 Samuel 6:21-22. His passion for God outweighed any concern for royal decorum. With the Ark in Jerusalem, David was ready to build a permanent dwelling for God. But God had an even grander plan in store for David's lineage. Having established Jerusalem as his capital and brought the Ark of the Covenant into its heart, David, now settled in his palace of cedar, was moved by a profound desire. He looked upon his own fine dwelling and then to the Ark, housed merely in a tent. "See now," he declared to Nathan the prophet, "I live in a house of cedar, but the Ark of God dwells in a tent." 2 Samuel 7:1-2. David yearned to build a magnificent, permanent temple for the Lord. Nathan, initially approving of David's pious intentions, received a divine word later that very night. God, through Nathan, delivered a powerful message. David would not build him a house. Instead, God declared, "I myself will establish a house for you." 2 Samuel 7:4-7. This was not a rebuke, but a revelation of a far greater plan. What God then revealed is known as the Davidic covenant, a cornerstone of biblical theology. God promised David an everlasting house, and your kingdom shall endure forever before me. Your throne shall be established forever. 2 Samuel 7:11-16.
This was an unconditional, eternal promise. A lasting dynasty, a kingdom, and a throne that would never end. It was a promise far grander than any physical temple. David's response was one of humble gratitude, a prayer overflowing with wonder.
Who am I, Lord God? And what is my family, that you have brought me this far?
2 Samuel 7:18. He marveled at God's unfathomable grace, acknowledging that this promise stretched far beyond his lifetime, extending into a distant, glorious future. The implications of this covenant are immense, echoing throughout Scripture. It points directly to the Messiah, to Jesus Christ, the Son of David, whose kingdom is indeed eternal. This promise cemented David's lineage as the rightful royal line, promising a future king who would reign forever. At the pinnacle of his reign, David faced his greatest personal test, one that would bring profound consequences. How would his integrity stand against temptation? Even the greatest heroes can stumble. At the height of his power, when kings usually led their armies to war, David remained in Jerusalem. It was a moment of idleness, a critical lapse in his discipline. From the rooftop of his palace, his eyes fell upon a woman bathing, her beauty captivating him. This was Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah the Hittite, one of David's most loyal soldiers, who was at that very moment fighting on the front lines. 2 Samuel 11:1-4. A single glance spiraled into a catastrophic chain of events. David sent for her, and in a moment of profound moral failure, committed adultery with her. The immediate consequence: Bathsheba became pregnant. The weight of his sin, a secret at first, began to press down. David, once a man of forthright action, descended into deception to cover his transgression. He called Uriah home from the battlefield, hoping Uriah would sleep with his wife, thus making the child appear to be his own. But Uriah, a man of unwavering integrity, refused to enjoy the comforts of home while his fellow soldiers fought and suffered. 2 Samuel 11:6-13. How often does one sin lead to another, digging a deeper hole? David's desperate attempts at cover-up escalated into a heinous crime.
He sent Uriah back to the front with a letter to Joab, his commander, ordering him to place Uriah in the fiercest part of the battle and then withdraw, ensuring his death.
2 Samuel 11:14-17. Uriah died, a loyal servant murdered by the king he served. The tragic irony of this sin is immense. David, a man after God's own heart, whose life was marked by incredible faith and loyalty, succumbed to lust and pride, sacrificing an innocent life to conceal his shame. It serves as a powerful, somber reminder that no one, regardless of their past devotion or anointing, is above temptation and its devastating consequences. David believed his secret was safe, but God saw everything. How would he be confronted, and what would be the price of his transgression? The silence of David's palace, so carefully maintained after Uriah's death, was shattered by the arrival of the prophet Nathan. God always sees, and God always holds his anointed accountable. Nathan approached the king not with accusation, but with a clever parable. A rich man with many flocks, who stole the poor man's single
beloved lamb for a guest. 2 Samuel 12, 1-4. David, his kingly indignation ignited by such injustice, declared, "As surely as the Lord lives, the man who did this deserves to die. He must pay for that lamb 4 times over, because he did such a thing and had no pity." 2 Samuel 12, 5, 6. And then, the thunderclap that ripped through David's self-deception. "You are the man." Nathan's powerful words stripped away every facade. 2 Samuel 12, 7. Imagine the sudden realization, the crushing weight of guilt. All the pretense, all the lies, crumbled in that single instant. David's proud heart, once full of self-righteous anger against the parable's villain, now recognized its own monstrous reflection. There was no hesitation, no excuse-making. David's response was immediate and utterly sincere. "I have sinned against the Lord." 2 Samuel 12, 13.
This, truly, is the mark of a man after God's own heart. Not his sinlessness, but his profound capacity for repentance. God, in his grace, forgave David the penalty of death for his sin. "The Lord has taken away your sin. You are not going to die." 2 Samuel 12, 13. But forgiveness does not always remove consequences. Nathan delivered the painful truth. The child born of Bathsheba would die, and more grievously, the sword would never depart from David's house. 2 Samuel 12, 14. When the child fell ill, David, in desperation, tore his clothes, lay on the ground, and fasted, pleading with God. But after 7 days, the child died. His servants feared to tell him, but David, sensing the truth, rose, washed, anointed himself, and went to the house of the Lord to worship. 2 Samuel 12, 20. Even in the depths of grief, his faith remained. The prophecy of the sword in David's house began to unfold, with devastating family tragedies. How would a king cope with such personal heartbreak? The bitter harvest of David's sin, prophesied by Nathan, began with a devastating sequence of family tragedies. The first dark chapter involved Amnon, David's eldest son, who orchestrated the brutal rape of his half-sister, Tamar. 2 Samuel 13. This horrific act set in motion a chain of revenge and hatred that would tear David's family apart. 2 years later, Absalom, Tamar's full brother, stewing in rage and plotting his vengeance, invited Amnon to a sheep-shearing feast and had him murdered. 2 Samuel 13, 28-29. Absalom fled, living in exile for 3 years before Joab, David's general, orchestrated his return. But even upon his return, the tension between father and son remained palpable. David's inability to decisively address the injustices within his own household brewed a deeper resentment. This resentment festered, allowing Absalom to cunningly steal the hearts of the people, flattering them and sowing seeds of discontent against his father's reign. 2 Samuel 15, 1-6.
He presented himself as the true champion, the one who would bring justice. The culmination of this deception was Absalom's full-blown rebellion, a shocking betrayal that forced David, at the height of his power, to flee Jerusalem with his loyal followers. 2 Samuel chapter 15, verses 13-17 and 30. Barefoot and weeping, David walked up the Mount of Olives, a poignant image of a king humbled by his own failings. As he fled, a man named Shimei emerged, cursing David and pelting him and his men with stones, shouting, get out, you man of blood, you scoundrel! The Lord has repaid you for all the blood of the house of Saul." 2 Samuel chapter 16, verses 5 through 8. David's men wanted to silence Shimei, but David, in a moment of profound humility and trust in God's sovereignty over even those who cursed him, famously declared, "Leave him alone. Let him curse, for the Lord has told him to. It may be that the Lord will look upon my misery and restore to me his gracious blessing instead of his curse today." 2 Samuel chapter 16, verses 11 through 12. This was a king whose leadership was now being tested, not just by external foes, but by the internal turmoil unleashed by his own moral failures. The rebellion ended with a tragic loss for David, highlighting the deep pain of a father. How would he navigate this grief while still leading a fractured kingdom? The clash was inevitable, a brutal civil war born of family strife and ambition. The Battle of Ephraim Wood was fierce, fought in a dense forest where the terrain itself became a weapon. Before the battle, David gave explicit orders to his commanders. "Deal gently for my sake with the young man Absalom." 2 Samuel chapter 18, verse 5. His heart, despite the betrayal, yearned for his son's safety. But fate, or perhaps divine judgment, had another plan. As Absalom rode through the thick forest, his long, magnificent hair, a source of his vanity, became entangled in the branches of a large oak tree. He was left suspended between heaven and earth, a chilling trap.
Joab, David's seasoned and ruthless general, disregarding the king's direct command, found Absalom and, with 3 javelins, thrust them into his heart, ensuring his death. 2 Samuel 18, verses 9 through 15. The rebellion was crushed. The news reached David, but his reaction was not one of relief or triumph. When he heard of Absalom's death, the king's grief was immediate and overwhelming. He went to the room above the city gate and wept, crying out, "Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom. If only I had died instead of you, Absalom, my son, my son." 2 Samuel 18, verse 33. This raw, visceral outpouring of a father's heartbreak for his rebellious son, even for the one who sought his life, is one of the most powerful and human moments in all of Scripture. It reveals the complex depths of David's character: a king, a warrior, a poet, and, above all, a grieving father. His men, who had just fought and won a war for him, were shamed by his profound sorrow. Eventually, Joab confronted David, reminding him of his duty to his people. David returned to Jerusalem, his authority re-established, but forever marked by the personal tragedies that unfolded as a consequence of his earlier sin. What an immense psychological and emotional toll this must have taken on the king. How does a leader carry such a weight of personal loss while governing a nation? Towards the end of his life, David turned his attention to preparing for the future of Israel and the building of the very temple God promised. What final acts would define his reign? Even though David was forbidden from building God's house himself, having shed too much blood through warfare, his heart burned with unwavering devotion. God, in his wisdom, had designated David's son Solomon for the grand task, 2 Samuel 7. Yet David, ever the visionary and planner, dedicated his remaining years to preparing for this sacred project. His ambition was not for personal glory, but for the glory of God and the spiritual flourishing of his nation.
He understood that the temple had to be exceedingly magnificent. 1 Chronicles 22:5, an enduring testament to God's majesty. David amassed an almost unimaginable quantity of materials, vast sums of gold and silver, bronze in quantities too great to be weighed, and iron without measure. He recruited skilled foreign craftsmen and prepared timbers, stones, and a supply of skilled artisans. 1 Chronicles 22:14. It was a logistical marvel, a king pouring his entire treasury into a project he would never personally see completed. But David's preparation went beyond mere physical materials. He meticulously organized the Levites into divisions for temple service, assigning roles for priests, musicians, and gatekeepers. He laid out the structure for worship, ensuring that the future temple would function with reverence and order, a blueprint for generations to come. 1 Chronicles 23-26. It was a profound act of spiritual foresight. As his life neared its end, David gathered his son Solomon and entrusted him with a sacred charge. "My son, I had it in my heart to build a house to the name of the Lord my God," David began, explaining God's prohibition. Then he urged Solomon, "Now, my son, may the Lord be with you, and may you have success and build the house of the Lord your God, as he said you would." 1 Chronicles 22:7-8, 11. He implored Solomon to be strong, courageous, and above all, to obey God's commands, for in that lay true prosperity. With the temple preparations underway, David faced a final challenge: ensuring a smooth transition of power. How would he secure Solomon's throne? As David's reign drew to a close, a fragile peace settled over the kingdom. But beneath the surface, ambition simmered. David, now old and frail, was less involved in the daily affairs of the kingdom, creating a vacuum that his eldest living son, Adonijah, sought to fill. Adonijah, much like Absalom before him, began to gather chariots, horsemen, and an entourage, subtly usurping the throne without David's knowledge. 1 Kings chapter 1, verse 5. He threw a lavish feast, inviting Joab and other key figures, effectively staging a coup. Where was the vigilance of the court during this critical time? Unbeknownst to Adonijah, God had already chosen Solomon to succeed David, a covenant made directly with Bathsheba and David. It was Nathan the prophet and Bathsheba herself who swiftly acted, their urgent intervention alerting the ailing David to Adonijah's conspiracy. Bathsheba approached David, reminding him of his solemn oath. Nathan followed, confirming the gravity of the situation. 1 Kings chapter 1, verse 11-27. This direct appeal stirred the old king. With his characteristic decisiveness, a flickering ember of his former strength, David quickly commanded that Solomon be immediately anointed king. "Have Zadok the priest and Nathan the prophet and Benaiah son of Jehoiada go down with my officials. Have them put my son Solomon on my own mule and take him down to Gihon. There have Zadok the priest and Nathan the prophet anoint him king over Israel. Blow the trumpet and shout, 'Long live King Solomon!'" 1 Kings chapter 1, verses 32 through 35. And so, in a dramatic countermove, the lawful succession was secured. As David's last days approached, he called Solomon to his side, delivering a powerful charge that echoed his life's lessons. "I am about to go the way of all the earth," David said. "Be strong, act like a man, and observe what the Lord your God requires. Walk in obedience to him and keep his decrees and commands, his laws and regulations, as written in the law of Moses. Do this so that you may prosper in all you do and wherever you go." 1 Kings chapter 2, verses 1 through 4. This deeply personal counsel revealed David's unwavering conviction that true strength lay in faithfulness to God. Before his death, David also offered a final prayer of profound praise to God before the entire assembly, blessing the Lord for his greatness, power, glory, majesty, and splendor, acknowledging that everything in heaven and earth is yours. 1 Chronicles 29, 10 through 13. David's long and complex journey finally came to its end, but his impact would resonate through generations, far beyond his lifetime. What is his enduring legacy? The final curtain fell on a reign that transformed a nation. After 40 tumultuous, glorious, and deeply human years, David, son of Jesse, passed into history. He was laid to rest with his fathers in Jerusalem, in the city he had built and loved, forever known as the City of David, 1 Kings 2, 10 through 11. But his story did not end with his death. David's legacy cast a long shadow, a golden standard against which all subsequent kings of Israel were implicitly measured. Was a king faithful? Did he walk in the ways of David his father? Good kings were those who followed David's example, while bad kings strayed from it. He became the epitome of Israelite kingship, despite his profound personal failures. David's voice, vibrant and raw, continues to resonate through the ages in the Psalms. These sacred poems and hymns, many attributed to him, capture the full spectrum of human emotion: penitence, joy, despair, triumph, doubt, and unwavering faith. They are a spiritual mirror, reflecting our own inner lives and anxieties back to us, and a bridge connecting us to the heart of God. How many generations have found comfort and inspiration in his words? Beyond his earthly reign and poetic prowess, David's most profound legacy lies in the Davidic covenant. This unbreakable promise made by God himself of an everlasting house, kingdom, and throne transcended David's own lifetime. It became the bedrock of Israel's messianic hope, pointing forward to a descendant who would truly fulfill all the promises.
Indeed, the New Testament opens with the declaration that Jesus Christ is the Son of David, Matthew 1:1, directly linking him to this eternal royal line. David's life, with all its triumphs and tragic flaws, paints a powerful picture of God's patient work through imperfect people to fulfill his perfect plan. What timeless lessons can we, in the modern world, draw from the life of this complex yet deeply spiritual man? How does his story speak to us today? David's life, in all its raw, unfiltered honesty, offers profound lessons that echo across millennia. First,
It reminds us of God's audacious sovereignty in choosing the unlikely. Who would pick a youngest shepherd boy, overlooked by his own family, to be king? Yet, God sees not as man sees, looking beyond outward appearances to the heart. This challenges our own preconceptions, doesn't it? It teaches us that God's plan often unfolds through unexpected vessels. Second, David's journey underscores the vital importance of unwavering faith and trust in God's timing, even through the most arduous trials. From facing Goliath to fleeing Saul, David's reliance on God, even when circumstances seemed hopeless, was his anchor. How often do we falter when our own paths become difficult? His life is a testament to perseverance and faith. Third, David's spectacular fall with Bathsheba and Uriah stands as a stark, sobering reminder. Sin is real, and its consequences are devastating, even for the most faithful. No one is above temptation, and our actions, even hidden ones, have ripple effects that touch countless lives. This dark chapter demolishes any notion of cheap grace, demonstrating that while God forgives, the painful harvest of our choices can still be reaped. Fourth, and crucially, David's immediate and heartfelt repentance, vividly portrayed in Psalm 51, reveals the transformative power of genuine remorse. His confession was not an excuse, but a broken spirit laid bare before God.
In return, he experienced God's complete forgiveness and restoration. It shows us that true spiritual recovery doesn't negate past mistakes, but redeems them, pointing to a God who is abundant in mercy. Finally, David's enduring title, a man after God's own heart, doesn't imply perfection. Far from it. It speaks to a heart that, despite its profound flaws and failings, continually sought God, confessed its sins, and returned to his ways. True greatness, then, is not found in an unblemished record, but in a lifelong pursuit of God's presence and purpose. David's story is a powerful reminder that God uses imperfect people for his perfect purposes. May we, like David, strive to be people after God's own heart,